Chapter 1. Introduction. A woman, a lamp, and the city that changed everything. In the year 441 before our common era, just before dawn, in a small house 3 streets back from the Athenian Agora, a woman named Lysandra reaches for a clay lamp on a low wooden shelf beside her bed. The wick is half burned from the night before. She lights it with a smoldering ember from the hearth her husband banked before sleeping. The flame catches, sputters, then steadies into a soft yellow glow that flickers across walls of mud brick washed a faded ochre. Outside, the city is still mostly dark, but already somewhere in the next street, a donkey is complaining about being saddled, and farther off, near the slope of the hill they call the Pericles, a single cock is making its opinion known. Lysandra is 34 years old. She has 3 living children and has buried one. Her husband, a citizen named Cleon, sleeps in the next room. Outside her door, in a city of perhaps 150,000 souls, slaves, citizens, metics, women, foreigners, all counted differently or not at all, the day is about to begin. And in 2,500 years, people watching a glowing rectangle in a language she has never heard of, in lands she has never imagined, will be talking about her city as though it explained almost everything they have become. But here is the part that has puzzled historians for 2,000 years. This small, frequently bickering collection of city-states, none of them with a population larger than a modern American suburb, most of them smaller than a county somehow produced, in roughly 200 years, more of what we now call Western civilization than any society before them, or any society for many centuries afterward. Philosophy, democracy, drama, mathematics, history as a discipline, sculpture that we still copy, the very idea that human beings might be the proper measure of things, and the people living through it, like Lysandra reaching for her lamp this morning, mostly had no idea anything remarkable was happening. They were too busy with the wool and the water and the cough in the next room. We will come back to that question, why them? Why there? Why then? But we have to walk through their world first to understand it. The answer is not in the marble, it is in the morning. Before we settle in, if you enjoy what we do here, a like or subscribe genuinely helps us keep making these. And if you studied the Greeks in school, or remember reading the Iliad in your high school English class, or had a teacher in the 50s or 60s who made the ancient world come alive in a way you have never quite forgotten, I would love to hear those memories down below. Your generation has likely read more about Athens than most professors will read in their lifetimes, and your perspective is welcome. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. The lamp is lit. Lysandra is awake. The city is stirring. Let us begin. Chapter 2. Lysandra's Dawn. A morning in a citizen's house. The first thing Lysandra does after lighting the lamp is something she has done every morning of her adult life. She wraps her woolen mantle around her shoulders against the chill, sets the lamp on the floor near the hearth, and kneels to feed the coals. She lifts the embers from beneath the banked ash with a small bronze hook her mother gave her at her marriage, and lays 3 thin slices of olive wood across them in a careful triangle. She blows gently 3 or 4 times, and the kindling catches. The wood is dry, the room is cool, and within a minute she has a small steady fire whose light competes with the lamps and wins. This is the part of the morning she likes best. Cleon still snores in the back room. The children are still asleep on their pallets behind a curtain of heavy wool. The slave girl Doris, who came into the household 2 years ago from somewhere in Thrace, is asleep on a thin mat against the courtyard wall. Lysandra does not think much about Doris in the abstract. She thinks about her the way one thinks about a younger sister, or a kitchen tool, sometimes warmly, sometimes with irritation, usually as a fact of the household. Doris was bought in the Agora for 120 drachmas, which is roughly what Cleon earns in 4 months of work at the small leather workshop he co-owns with his brother. The girl will get up shortly, fetch water, help with the wool, eat with the family if it is a calm day, and sleep where she sleeps. She is not free, and she will not be free. And no one in the house, including Doris, thinks of this as remarkable. So Lysandra sits on her stool by the small fire and the lamp and begins the work she does first every morning. She combs wool. There is a basket of it at her feet, raw fleece bought from a shepherd in the Attic countryside 2 weeks ago and washed in alkaline ash water last week. The combing is patient work. The teeth of the wooden comb catch on the fibers and straighten them, and the fleece slowly becomes something that can be spun. There is a thing about this scene that ought to be said plainly, because the rest of the night does not make sense without it. While Lysandra sits on her stool combing wool in the lamplight 2 miles away, on the slope of a hill called the Pericles, men are also beginning to stir. Some of them will, in a few hours, gather to vote, actually vote, by show of hand, several thousand of them at once, on whether the Athenian fleet should sail against the island of Samos, whether boys her son's age will be put on triremes and rowed into the eastern Aegean to die in salt water or come home strange. Lysandra will not be present at that vote. She is not a citizen. No woman in Athens is. She cannot enter the assembly, cannot vote on the fleet, cannot stand in court to defend herself if accused, cannot legally own property worth more than a single bushel of barley, and cannot, except on rare festival days, walk the streets without a male relative or a slave at her side. The democracy that the marble columns down the street are being built to celebrate is a democracy that has no place for her at all. And she does not, this morning, sit on her stool seething about it. She thinks about democracy the way you might think about gravity as a fact of the world, not a system to be questioned. The wool needs combing, the bread needs baking, the youngest is still coughing. There will, later in the morning, be a moment when she sends Doris to the public fountain for water, and that errand will turn out to matter. But she does not know that yet. She combs wool. She listens to the slow waking of the house. She thinks about the breakfast she will make for the household. Bread from yesterday, dipped in olive oil. A handful of olives from the wide-mouthed clay jar against the wall. A little wine cut heavily with water for Cleon, none for the children before noon, none for Doris until she has finished the morning's water fetching. It is roughly the same breakfast Lysandra ate as a child in her father's house in the same neighborhood. It is roughly the same breakfast her grandmother ate, and her grandmother's grandmother. Greek breakfasts have a continuity that the political history of Greek city-states does not. There is, you should know, no coffee. There is no tea. There is no anything hot to drink in the morning, unless one counts a wretched gruel of barley and water that Lysandra sometimes makes for the children when they are sick. The Greeks have wine. They have water. They have, for special occasions, a thick fermented honey and grape syrup that is closer to dessert than to beverage. But they do not have the morning ritual that anyone watching this video understands as morning ritual. Those who lived through the war years, when coffee was rationed and chicory pretended to be its cousin, may have the faintest distant echo of what it is to wake up in a world that has no caffeine at all. Lysandra tears a piece of bread off the loaf and dips a corner of it into the olive oil. She chews slowly. The oil is from her own household's small share of last autumn's pressing. Cleon owns a quarter stake in 14 olive trees, on a hillside a half-day's walk to the north, and it tastes faintly bitter, faintly grassy, the way good fresh oil does. She is, at this moment, eating the foundation of Greek civilization: the olive, the grain, and the grape. Those three crops, more than any other single fact, are why anything that follows tonight is possible. The land around Athens is, by the honest measure of farmers, not very good. The soil is thin. Rain falls mostly in winter, and not enough of it. Wheat struggles. Barley does better. Most ground that would, in modern Iowa or modern Lincolnshire, be planted with wheat or grass for cattle, in Attica is planted instead with olives, because olives do not mind thin, stony soil, do not mind dry summers, and produce from a single mature tree somewhere between 20 and 40 kilograms of oil a year for 200 or 300 years. We will come back much later tonight to the question of what it meant to be ruined when an enemy army marched into your countryside and burned your olive groves to stumps. That story is coming. But the oil on Lysandra's bread this morning is the answer to a question Greek farmers had been asking for 1,000 years before her. How do you live well on land that does not particularly want you to? After breakfast, which is brief, because there is not much to it. Lysandra stands at her loom for a moment without yet beginning. The loom is the largest object in the room. It is taller than she is, made of seasoned cypress wood by her father-in-law decades ago, and it has produced over those decades the cloth that has dressed 3 generations of this family. Today she will weave perhaps 2 finger widths of cloth. Tomorrow, another 2. By the end of the month, she will have a length of fabric suitable for a child's chiton. By the end of the year, enough for several. This is what a woman of her household, in her city, in her century, does with most of her waking life. She begins to weave. The shuttle passes through the warp threads, left to right. She presses the new line of weft tight against the work above it, with a slim wooden beater. The shuttle passes right to left. The beater taps again. It is the sound of every household in Athens at this hour. If you stood in the middle of Lysandra's street at dawn and closed your eyes, the dominant sound, more than any donkey or rooster or cart, would be the soft, regular tap of beaters against weft. The city, at this hour, sounds like cloth being made. We will get to the Agora soon, to the men's hour, to the assembly, to the market with its 100 competing smells. But the Agora is also being clothed, right now, by this sound, in 1,000 small rooms. About now, just past the first proper light of morning, the rest of the household begins to wake. Doris stirs first, because Doris is supposed to. The girl rises from her mat, wraps herself in her own coarse mantle, and pads barefoot into the room where Lysandra is weaving. She nods. Lysandra nods back. There are no greetings. The household is past that. Doris's first task, every morning, is the water. The house has no well of its own. Most houses in Athens do not. There is a public fountain at the end of 3 streets, in a small square fed by a covered terracotta aqueduct that brings spring water down from the hills to the north. Doris will take the large jar, walk perhaps 10 minutes, fill it, set it on a coiled cloth pad on her head, and walk back. She will do this 2 or 3 times before noon. The household uses water for cooking, for washing hands before meals, for the small cups of wine cut with water that count as drinking, and, on occasion, for a careful wiping of children's faces. Most other washing happens at the fountain itself, or at the public baths, and the public baths are a story for later. There are details there that will surprise you. Chapter 3. The Fountain, the Street, and a City Waking. Doris settles the jar on her head and steps out into the street. The cool air of the morning has lifted, and the city now has the soft amber light that Athens in early spring is famous for, though no one has yet bothered to be famous about it. Doris does not herself find the light beautiful, because Doris is 17 and tired, and is thinking mainly about her left ankle, which she turned slightly yesterday on a loose stone in this same street. She walks carefully. She has learned to walk carefully. The Fountain Square, when she arrives, is one of the few places in Athens where a foreign-born female slave belongs, at least for the duration of filling a jar. There are perhaps a dozen women here. 2 are citizen wives with small children, here because their household has no slave to send. The rest are slaves, Thracian like Doris, or Phrygian or Carian, or in one case, a thin dark-haired girl from a place none of them quite knows the name of, who arrived in the city last summer on a ship from somewhere east. They are not friends, exactly, but they know each other. The water is slow. There is time to talk. This morning, the conversation at the fountain is the conversation that is also happening at the assembly hill 2 miles away, except that the slave women at the fountain heard about it from their masters last night, and the men on the Pnyx are still pretending it has not been decided yet. The fleet, says the Phrygian girl, is going to sail against Samos within the month. Doris, who has been in Athens long enough to understand most of what she hears, says nothing. She thinks about her ankle and about her master's brother, who will probably be on one of the triremes. He is not unkind to her, but he is not someone whose drowning, in her private accounting, would cost her anything. The 2 men who walk along the upper edge of the square at this moment in pale hematia, in mid-conversation about something neither of them will remember by lunch, do not look at the fountain. They could not tell you, if asked, how many women are there. They could not tell you that one of them is from Phrygia and one from somewhere on the Black Sea coast. The fountain, for them, is invisible. The women who use it are invisible. And yet, the men's clean linen is washed at this fountain, and the wine in their cups is cut with this water, and the bread they ate this morning was kneaded by women who fetched this water before sunrise. We will come back much later tonight to the question of what democracy actually meant in a city where most of the work of the city was done by people who could not vote. The answer is more interesting than it sounds. We are not there yet. Doris's jar fills. It takes longer than she would like, because the fountain spouts are narrow and the line is patient. When it is full, she lifts it carefully. A full jar weighs roughly 30 pounds, and she has been lifting full jars onto her head since she was 13, settles it on the cloth pad, and turns for home. The Phrygian girl says something parting in Greek that her grammar would not survive in a courtroom, but that Doris understands perfectly. They will see each other again at noon, or tomorrow morning, or the morning after that, until one of them is sold to a different house, or dies, or is freed in a master's will, or simply stops appearing one day for reasons no one will explain. She walks back. She takes the same route. She knows every loose stone, every doorway, every place where a dog might come out and bark. She knows that the 3rd house on the left belongs to a leather worker whose wife is kind, and that the 5th house on the right belongs to a man whose wife is not. She knows, even, that the small olive tree leaning over the wall of the 2nd courtyard belongs to a household whose master is one of the rich men of the Dem, meaning his vote in the assembly, which she cannot cast, is one of the votes that will, today, send the Athenian fleet against Samos. When Doris steps back into the courtyard of Lysandra's house, the sun is high enough that the eastern wall is fully lit, and the dust is rising softly in the warm air. Cleon has by now finished his bread and oil and has left for the workshop. The children are awake. The oldest, a boy of 9 called Philon, is sitting on the doorstone tying a knot in a length of cord he has found somewhere. The younger 2, a girl of 6 and a girl of 3, are bickering over a wooden doll the older one made for the younger one, and now wants back. Lysandra has her loom shuttle in one hand and a piece of bread in the other, and she is, in a manner that anyone who has raised children in any century would recognize, eating standing up, pretending not to hear the bickering, and weaving at the same time. This is the moment in Lysandra's morning that anyone who has ever managed a household with small children will recognize in their bones. It is the moment when several things must happen at once, none of them particularly important, all of them necessary. She nods to Doris. Pour some of the water into the small clay basin by the hearth, leave the rest in the large jar by the door, then come and help with the bread. She tells Philon to stop tying the cord around his sister's wrist, and Philon, with the unconvincing innocence of all 9-year-olds, replies that he was not doing that. She tells the 6-year-old gently that the doll belongs now to her sister because she gave it, and giving means giving. The 6-year-old considers this for a moment with the philosophical seriousness of a small Greek child weighing a moral principle, and then begins quietly to cry. Lysandra hands her a piece of bread. The crying stops. We will come back very much later tonight to the question of how Athenian children were raised into the people they became, and to the question of what Athens did with sons it intended for the assembly and daughters it intended for the loom. The hint is in this moment, in the bread, in the doll, in the difference between Philon's morning and his sister's. Chapter 4. Bread, wool, and the sound of an ordinary morning. The bread is what closes out Lysandra's morning. Doris has poured the water. The children have been quieted and fed and sent, 2 of them, to the inner courtyard to play with a small wooden top and a piece of string. Lysandra now has perhaps an hour before the bread needs to be in the small clay oven against the courtyard wall, and she uses that hour to do what she does, in the rhythm of any well-run household, by long habit. She kneads. The dough is mostly barley. Wheat is more expensive. Wheat has to be imported, mostly from the Black Sea grain trade, because Attica cannot grow enough of its own, and Lysandra uses wheat flour only on festival days, or when her mother-in-law comes to visit, which is to say, only on days she would rather forget. Barley is the bread of every ordinary Athenian household. It is dark, dense, slightly sour, and faintly sweet at the same time. It does not rise like wheat bread. It does not need to. It is the bread that Greeks have eaten since the first farmers cleared the first stony field somewhere near the Aegean coast, more than 3,000 years before Lysandra was born. When the dough is ready, she carries it to the courtyard, slides it into the small domed clay oven on a wooden paddle her husband made when they were first married, and seals the door. The oven has been heating since just after dawn, on a small fire of olive wood and dried twigs. The bread will bake in perhaps half an hour. In that half hour, Lysandra will not rest. She will return to the loom. The cloth she is weaving is for her older daughter, a chiton for the festival of Athena coming in the autumn, and she would like to have it finished before the heat of summer makes weaving by lamp at night unpleasant. The cloth she weaves is plain, but for one detail at one edge, she is working a thin band of pale dyed wool into the weft. The dye is from a small clay jar her sister sent her last month, made from a particular kind of lichen scraped off the rocks of a hillside on the island of Kythera and steeped in stale urine for 3 weeks. The smell of the dye jar is, frankly, an experience, but the color that emerges after washing is a soft, warm rose, and the band of it will run along the lower hem of her daughter's festival chiton. And her daughter, in autumn, will be among the girls walking in procession to the Acropolis to bring a new woven robe to the goddess Athena. We will get to that festival before the night is out, to the great procession that wound up the slope of the Acropolis, and to what the Greeks meant by a goddess at all. There is a story in that procession that explains as much about Athens as any battle does. But first, the bread needs to come out of the oven. She does take it out, in the moment, when she judges the smell from the courtyard has reached the precise point of done. She has no clock. She has the sun, the smell, and 40 years of her mother and grandmother teaching her hands what bread smells like at the moment it stops being dough. She slides the paddle under the loaf, lifts it onto a clean linen cloth on the stone bench, and lets it cool. The bread is dense, dark, and faintly cracked across the top. It will feed the household through the rest of the day and into tomorrow. It is, in its modest way, a small daily miracle that civilization runs on, and has run on in some form or other since civilization began. While Lysandra is sliding the bread onto the linen, 3 streets west of her courtyard, in the long sloping quarter that lies between her house and the old city gate, another Athenian morning is well underway. The street is wider here, and dustier, and the smell that rides on the air is not the smell of bread, but the smell of damp clay, wood smoke from a dozen banked kilns, and the faint, sharp tang of fish glue used for fixing handles. This is the Kerameikos, the potter's quarter, and the men who work here are the reason the Greek word for fired clay, keramos, has come down to us 2,500 years later, as the word for almost every kind of fired vessel we own. In the third workshop along this street, a man named Diocles is at his wheel. He is 45, lean, grayed at the temples, and the hands he is using to shape the column of clay between them have done this same work, in this same room, every day except festival days and the days he was on campaign, since he was 12. His father was a potter. His father's father was a potter. He has 2 sons, both apprenticed to him, both at this moment in the back of the workshop, preparing slip and trimming the leather-hard rims of yesterday's work. Diocles does not particularly notice the dust in the air, or the smell of clay, or the warmth of the floor against his bare ankles. They are the conditions of his life, the way water is the condition of a fish. The pot rising between his hands at this moment is a wine-mixing bowl, a crater, commissioned by a merchant whose son is being married next month. The wedding will be held at the family's house near the Agora. There will be a banquet. The crater is the centerpiece of the banquet, because the crater is where the wine is mixed with water before being ladled into the cups of the men. The Greeks do not drink wine straight. To drink wine straight is, in their cultural vocabulary, what barbarians do. The Persians do it, the Thracians do it, the Macedonians do it, which is part of why the Greeks consider the Macedonians barely Greek at all. A civilized man drinks his wine cut with water, in a ratio that good hosts agree on and bad hosts get wrong. And the crater is the vessel that does the cutting. Diocles' workshop produces, in a good month, perhaps 60 finished pieces. Wine cups, water jars, oil jars, perfume bottles, craters, lamps, simple plates. About a third are sold here in Athens, mostly through a stall his older brother runs in the Agora. About a third go through middlemen down to the harbor at Piraeus, where they are loaded onto merchant ships and travel. And here is one of the small daily miracles of the Greek world that the marble columns do not advertise to places Diocles will never see. Black Sea coast, southern Italy, Sicily, sometimes as far as the Iberian Peninsula. Pots made by his hands in this small smoky room end up on banquet tables in cities his father had not heard of. The remaining third are commissions like the crater on his wheel. Right now, specific orders for specific households. When the crater is shaped, Diocles slows the wheel with the inside of his foot, a motion as precise as a watchmaker's, learned over 30 years, and lifts the wet pot, with a flat wire and a small wooden disc, off the wheelhead. He carries it to the shelf, sets it among its siblings, and drapes a damp cloth over them all. The handles will go on tomorrow when the clay is leather hard. The painted decoration, the figures, the geometric bands, the small black glaze patterns that any museum visitor today will recognize as quintessentially Greek will be done by Diocles himself 2 days from now, when the clay is dry enough to take a brush. He paints the figures from memory. He has in his head a small library of perhaps 100 standard scenes: a chariot race, a hunt, a wedding procession, a god seducing a mortal, a hero fighting a monster. And he selects one for each pot based on what the buyer wants. Diocles is a citizen. This is a fact about him that he carries quietly, the way Lysandra carries the fact that she is not. He was born to citizen parents, in a citizen deme, a kind of voting parish, registered as a citizen at 18 by his father in front of the men of the dem, and called up when his year class was called to serve in the army. He has fought twice, once at the age of 20 against the island of Aegina, where he carried a spear and a round wooden shield in a phalanx line for an afternoon that felt, he will tell you over wine, like a year. Once at 31 against a force of allied cities that had attempted to leave the Athenian alliance, an experience he will not discuss at all, except occasionally, late at night, when a particular kind of cup is in his hand. Chapter 5. The citizen at the wheel, craft, vote, and the working man's Athens. The helmet hangs on a peg in the back corner of the workshop. The shield leans against the wall beneath it. They are not decorations. They are equipment, kept in working order, oiled twice a year, ready to be lifted off the peg the morning the messenger comes from the dem captain with the news that the army is being called up again. Every citizen hoplite in Athens, every man, that is, who can afford his own armor, which is the entry ticket to the heavy infantry, keeps his gear at home like this. It is not stored in some imperial armory. It belongs to him personally, and he is personally responsible for showing up with it when the city calls. Those who served in the National Guard or in any reserve force in any era will recognize the principle immediately. The citizen soldier is, in a sense, the Greeks invented, the same man who fires the bowl and the same man who fights the war. On the bench beside the wheel sits a small wooden tablet coated in dark wax, with a slender bronze stylus laid across it. Diocles, like most working Athenian citizens of his class, can read and write well enough anyway, to keep accounts, to recognize his own name and the names of his sons on a list pinned up in the Agora, to scratch a note to a customer. He cannot read Homer fluently. He has heard Homer read aloud, in public, every summer of his life at the great festivals, and he knows long passages by heart the way an American of a certain generation knows the King James Bible, not because he sat down with it, but because the words come back to him at funerals and weddings and quiet evenings, in his own voice and his father's. Literacy in 5th century Athens is not what literacy is now. It is uneven, practical, and embedded in a culture that still mostly trusts the ear more than the page. His sons are called Demetrios and Hippon. The older is 14, the younger 12. In 4 years, when Demetrios turns 18, his father will take him to the dem registry, a small whitewashed building on a side street near the Agora, and present him to the assembled men of the neighborhood, who will verify that his father was a citizen, his mother the daughter of a citizen, and that the boy is therefore eligible to be enrolled. He will spend the next 2 years in something the Athenians call the ephebia, essentially national service, 2 years of military training, watchtower duty on the Attic frontier, and the gradual transition from boy to man of the city. After that, he will vote. He will sit on juries. He will be eligible for the lottery that fills most of Athens' civic offices. He will, in short, be one of the perhaps 40,000 men in this city who together constitute the demos, the people whose collective decisions, by show of hand on the panics, are the laws of the state. This is the part of Athenian life that is hardest, perhaps, for a modern listener to feel in the bones. Diocles is not a noble. He is not rich. He owns this workshop and the small house behind it. He owns 2 slaves who help with the heavier work of kneading clay and tending the kiln. He owns his shield and his helmet and his vote. And his vote on the Pnyx counts exactly the same as the vote of the wealthiest landowner in Attica. There are no property qualifications above the line that lets him vote in the first place. There is no upper house of aristocrats whose approval is required. There is no king. There is no senate of the well-born. Once he is in the assembly, his hand in the air is one of perhaps 6,000 hands on a busy day, and a simple majority of those hands carries the city. That is the practical reality, and you should sit with it for a moment, because the Athenians themselves did. They knew what they had built was strange. Their neighbors thought it was insane. Persia, the great empire to the east, was ruled by a king whose word was law and whose person was practically a god. Sparta, the great rival to the south, was ruled by a small council of elders, 2 ceremonial kings, and a citizen body that, while it voted on a much narrower range of matters and lived under a discipline that made Athens look like a holiday by comparison. The kingdoms north of the Aegean Macedon, Thrace, were ruled by warlords with names and ambitions. In all of those places, a potter would never have spoken in the same room as a landed nobleman, much less voted against him. This morning, on the Pnyx, the assembly is gathering for the question of Samos. The herald has already gone through the streets at dawn, calling the men of the Demas to attend. Diocles knows. He has known since yesterday afternoon, when the announcement was posted in the Agora on whitewashed boards under the Colonnade. He has decided, in the way one decides about an obligation that is also a habit, that he will close the workshop at midday, walk the half-mile up the dusty path to the Pnyx, and add his hand to whichever side seems sensible after he has heard the speakers. He is not, by temperament, a political man. He listens carefully. He votes consistently. He once voted, in his 30s, against the advice of every man in his deme, in a way that he still considers one of the better decisions of his life. And he will not tell you what the vote was. We will get to the assembly itself before the night is done, to what it actually looked and sounded like, to the speakers and the show of hands and the strange quiet that fell over 6,000 men when an old veteran rose to speak. But first, there is something Diocles needs to do, and it will take him, for a moment, out of the workshop and into the Agora. He calls something over his shoulder to the boys at the back of the workshop. The older one, Demetrios, raises a hand in acknowledgement without looking up from the cup he is trimming. The slip will be ready when his father returns. The damp cloths will be checked. The wheel will be still. Diocles wipes his hands a final time on the linen, lifts his himation off the peg by the door, and drapes it across his shoulders. The himation is a single rectangle of woolen cloth, undyed, about the size of a modern bedsheet, and it is the one garment that distinguishes a man going out into the city as a citizen from a man who is merely at work in his tunic. He steps out into the street. The midday sun is on the mud brick walls. The dust hangs in the air. A boy with a basket of fish from the harbor at Piraeus passes him, calling out the price without looking up. A neighbor 2 doors down is shouting at a slave who has spilled a jar of water. Somewhere, a few streets over, A small choir of boys is practicing the chorus they will sing at next month's festival, and the sound, high, slightly off-key, persistent, drifts on the warm air. Diocles turns east, toward the Agora, and begins to walk. The street is uneven beneath his sandals. He knows it the way Doris knows the route to the fountain. He could walk it blindfolded. What he is going to the Agora for is not entirely the assembly. The assembly is later, and the Phoenix is in the other direction anyway. He is going first because his brother has a stall there, and his brother sent word yesterday that one of the cups Diocles painted last month, a small drinking cup with a scene of a hunter and a stag, has been bought by a particular customer, and that the buyer left a question that needed answering. Diocles, who treats his pots with the affection a farmer treats his fields, would like to know who bought it. Pots, in Athens, often carry the painter's name. A pot that travels well, that ends up in a banquet in Syracuse or a tomb in Etruria, carries a small bit of his hand into a world he will never visit. The buyer of the cup this time is, and here in the Agora is where the story Diocles does not yet know is waiting for him, a man who teaches philosophy. The Agora opens before him at the end of the street like a kind of small, loud sea. The Athenian Agora at midday is one of the genuinely remarkable spaces of the ancient world, and it is impossible to describe it accurately without resorting to the language of marketplaces in other times and places, the great bazaars of medieval Damascus, the country market towns of 19th century England, the Lower East Side of New York around 1910. Anyone who walked through those will understand the basic principle: a central open square, paved roughly with sun-bleached limestone. Around its edges, low colonnades, stoas, where shade is to be had and serious business is conducted. Within the square, stalls of every sort: fish, olive oil, wine in amphorae, woolen cloth, painted pots, leather goods, fresh bread, raw garlic, dried figs from the islands, small caged birds, sandals, lamps, herbs, perfume, jewelry, and, in a corner, everyone tries to walk around, the offal of yesterday's animals being sold cheap to the very poor. Diocles, in the Agora, is no longer a craftsman at his wheel. He is one citizen among thousands, and the city itself, in this open square, is doing something the marble columns up on the Acropolis are not really equipped to do. The Agora is where Athens, as a community, actually happens. It is where men meet to talk politics before walking up to the Pnyx to vote. It is where lawsuits are filed and witnesses cornered. It is where a young man, if he wants, can stand by the colonnade of the painted stoa and listen to an older man with an opinion about how to live, and where, if he is lucky, and the old man is interesting enough, he may keep going back every afternoon for a year, and become, though he will not know to call it this yet, a philosopher. The marble buildings will get the museums and the textbooks, but the conversations that made the textbooks possible happened, mostly here, on this dusty paving, between the fishmonger and the oil seller and the man selling caged birds. That, too, is a thing we will come back to before the night is done. Chapter 6. The Agora at Midday. A brother, a buyer, and a painted cup. Socrates, when he sees his brother coming, raises a hand in the wide salute of older brothers everywhere. He is 5 years older than Diocles, taller by half a head, and considerably better fed. He has not thrown a pot in 30 years. What he has done, every working day of those 30 years, is stand behind this stall, talk to customers, talk to other vendors, talk to passing acquaintances, talk to anyone who will hold still long enough and sell at a small but consistent markup. The work of his brother's hands, and, in slimmer quantities, of 2 other small workshops in the Kerameikos who pay him a commission to take their pots to market. "The cup is here," Socrates says, "sold, but not yet collected." The buyer paid in advance with a half-drachma deposit and said he would come back this afternoon to take it home. He asked, while he was here, whether the painter, meaning Diocles, would consider doing a set of 4 matching cups on a theme he would choose. Socrates named a price. The buyer did not haggle, which interested Socrates, because everyone in Athens haggles, and a buyer who does not haggle is either very rich, very distracted, or very strange. This one, Socrates says, was the third. Diocles picks up the cup. He turns it in his hands. He knows it the way a writer knows a paragraph. He painted the hunter's bow last month, on a quiet afternoon, holding the cup steady on his knee, with a brush made of 3 hairs from a hare's tail. The stag was harder. The leap had to suggest motion without breaking the figure's stillness. He looks at the hunter now, at the angle of the bow, and decides, with the small private satisfaction of any craftsman looking at old work, that it is, on the whole, not bad. He sets the cup down. He asks Socrates who the buyer was. Socrates describes him: middle-aged, plainly dressed, soft-spoken, with the slightly distracted expression of a man whose mind is elsewhere. A philosopher, Socrates guesses. There are a lot of them in the Agora these days. 2,500 years later, the small joke Socrates has just made will turn out to have been more accurate than anyone in the family realized. The buyer of Diocles' hunter and stag cup, in the version of this story I am telling you tonight, is not a famous man yet, and may never be one, but he is one of perhaps a few hundred Athenians in this exact year who have begun to gather, in the shade of the painted stoa and the colonnades of the Agora and the small gymnasiums on the city's edge, to ask each other out loud, in public, in the same way one would discuss the price of olive oil, questions that no other civilization on Earth, at this hour, is asking with quite the same insistence. What is justice? What is courage? What does it mean to live well? What is the city for? This is a thing that has to be said carefully, because the popular impression of Greek philosophy is mostly white marble busts and dense textbooks, and the popular impression is, in this case, badly wrong. Philosophy in 5th century Athens was not done in libraries. There were no libraries. It was done standing up, in the shade of a colonnade, by men in plain wool clothes with calloused hands, who interrupted each other freely, who often argued in a way that, if you had walked past, would have sounded indistinguishable from any other quarrel in the marketplace. The men who did this were not, mostly, professional philosophers. That concept did not yet exist. They were potters and shoemakers and farmers and the occasional rich man's son, and what they had in common was the time and the inclination, in the middle of the working day, to stop and ask one another whether they actually understood the words they were using. That last part is the part that matters. The Greeks did not invent thinking. People in Babylon had been thinking for 2,000 years before Athens existed. The Egyptians had been thinking, sometimes, about deeply abstract things, since the pyramids were already old. China had philosophers in this very century who, in some respects, were the equals of any Greek. What Athens did, and it is genuinely unclear, even now, why Athens and not somewhere else, was build a culture in which an ordinary man in a marketplace could stop another ordinary man in the same marketplace and demand that he explain what he meant by the word good. And the second man would not consider this a strange or rude question. He would consider it, in fact, a kind of compliment. The conversation that followed might last an hour. It might draw a small crowd. It might end in a punchline or in a long, irritable silence. Either way, it had happened, and it would happen again tomorrow. Diocles asks Socrates whether the buyer left a name. Socrates says yes, the buyer left a name and a deme and an indication of where his house was. The name was a common one, and Socrates does not, at the moment, remember it precisely. It was, he thinks, something with a kappa in it, but possibly a kappa and a gamma. He has the man's stylus mark on the wax tablet at the back of the stall. He goes to look. Diocles waits, leaning against the counter, listening to the Agora. The fishmonger, 2 stalls down, is arguing about the price of sardines. A woman, somewhere behind him, is laughing at something. A small child is crying without conviction. The Agora, in midday, has a particular density of sound that is, once you have lived in it, the closest thing in his life to silence. It is worth pausing here, with Diocles leaning on his brother's counter, to take in a fact about this city that the marble columns up the hill will, in their slow, eroding way, keep advertising for 2,500 years. The total free citizen population of Athens in this exact year is somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 adult men. The city's slaves are perhaps 80,000. The metic's resident foreigners, perhaps 20,000. The women, citizen and slave together, perhaps another 70,000. Add the children. The total population of Greater Athens and its harbor town, Piraeus, is somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of a million. That is roughly the size of modern Toledo, Ohio, or modern Plymouth in England, or modern Brescia in Italy. That is the size of the city counting all the people, free and unfree, male and female, child and adult, that, in the next century and a half, will produce Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, Thucydides and Herodotus, Phidias and the Parthenon, the first treatises on medicine, the first treatises on politics, the first sustained attempts to describe the natural world in terms of natural causes, and the first form of government in which large numbers of ordinary men, sitting on a bare hillside, voted directly on what their state would do. That is a remarkable density of consequence for what was, by any honest reckoning, a town. The mystery I asked you about at the beginning of tonight, why these people, why this place, why this time is starting, slowly, to come into focus, though we are not quite at the answer yet. We will get there. The Agora is part of it. The dust is part of it. The fact that Diocles, who paints hunters and stags on cups, can lean on his brother's counter and listen, for free, to whatever conversations are happening in the colonnade 20 feet away, that too is part of it. Socrates comes back with the tablet. The name, he says, is Kallias, son of Hipponikos, from the deme of Alopeke. Diocles takes this in, nods slowly, and does not say what he is thinking, which is that the name is the name of one of the richest families in Athens. Kallias is a name born in this generation by a man who owns silver mines at Lorion, who has paid for at least one warship out of his own pocket, who has hosted ambassadors from Persia and from Syracuse, and who is rumored, though Diocles considers most Agora rumor to be the entertainment value it deserves, and no more, to have, in his country house outside the city, a private collection of painted vases that would not embarrass a small museum. That his hunter and stag cup, painted on a quiet afternoon by a working potter in the Kerameikos, is going to live in a house belonging to a man like that, is the kind of small accidental dignity that makes a craftsman's day. Diocles does not show it. He nods at his brother, asks about the proposed set of 4 cups, agrees on a price and a delivery date, and lifts a small olive from a clay dish at the edge of the counter and chews it slowly while he thinks. Socrates watches him with the half-smile of an older brother who has watched the same expression on the same face for 40 years. He says eventually that Diocles ought to go home and eat something proper before the assembly. The assembly is the second reason Diocles came down to the Agora, and it is now, by the position of the sun above the colonnade, perhaps an hour away. While Diocles finishes his olive at his brother's stall and considers whether to walk home first or directly up toward the Pnyx, 2¼ miles to the east of the city, along the dusty Eleusinian road that runs out into the countryside of Attica, a third household has long since been awake and is beginning, slowly, to make its way toward the same hill. The household belongs to a man named Kallias, and yes, it is the same Kallias, though Diocles does not know that yet, and will not know it for some time, son of Hipponikos, of the Deme of Alopeke. Chapter 7. Kallias of Alopeke, a country house and a wealthy man's morning. Kallias is 52 years old. He is the third Kallias in his line, and his grandfather of the same name was, in his time, one of the wealthiest men in Athens, wealthy enough that the family for 2 generations has been called, half affectionately, half mockingly, the rich Kallias, as though to distinguish them from the ordinary kind. The current Kallias inherited, at the age of 24 when his father died, an estate that included a large country house at Alopeke, a smaller townhouse near the Acropolis, productive olive groves and vineyards covering perhaps 200 acres, a quarter share in the silver mines at Laurion in southern Attica, 3 working merchant ships based at Piraeus, and somewhere between 40 and 60 slaves, depending on the season and what work was being done. He sits this morning under the portico of the country house. He has eaten, hours ago, a breakfast that included wheat bread, proper wheat, not barley, and fresh cheese from a small herd of goats his estate manager keeps in a paddock beyond the vineyards, and a small dish of dried figs from the islands. He is now, in the period between breakfast and the necessity of leaving for the assembly, reading. The thing he is reading is a long handwritten letter, on 3 small unrolled lengths of papyrus, sent 2 weeks ago from a friend in Syracuse and arrived yesterday on the small fast trading ship that runs back and forth between Sicily and Piraeus. The letter is from a man Kallias has known since his 20s, when both of them, as wealthy young Athenians on a kind of grand tour of the Greek world, spent a season in Syracuse, and another in Tarentum, and another in Naucratis on the Nile Delta, and developed, in the loose way of well-off young men in any era, the habit of writing each other long, argumentative letters about politics and poetry that would, in any other century, be considered showing off. The letter today is mostly about Syracusan politics, which Kallias finds engaging at a distance and is glad not to be involved in, and partly about a particular point of philosophy, what makes a friendship, which the friend wishes Kallias to respond to at length when next he writes. It is worth taking a moment, while Kallias reads, to look out from his portico the way he occasionally does, and to understand what his portico looks out on. The olive grove that begins 20 yards from the front step extends in rough alignment for perhaps a quarter mile down a gentle southern slope. There are, in his accounting, 492 olive trees on this section of the estate. Some of them are older than his grandfather. One particularly venerable tree by the field wall at the bottom of the slope has, according to family tradition, been bearing fruit since the time of Solon, the great lawgiver who lived 150 years before Kallias was born. The tree may or may not actually be that old. Kallias suspects family tradition, but the tree is undeniably ancient, and Kallias has, more than once, walked down to it in the evening and put his hand on its trunk and thought about what it had seen. Olives are a way of being patient. An olive seedling takes 7 years to bear fruit. It takes 15 to bear well. It will bear then for as long as anyone reading this will live, and longer. The men who planted the oldest trees in Kallias's grove are dust. Their grandchildren are dust. The trees are still here. This is not a small thing in a Greek mind. It is, in a way that we will come back to before the night is done, the bone-deep reason that Athenians can stand on the Pnyx and argue about whether to send a fleet against Samos, as though the city itself will live forever. The olives, after all, are still bearing. Inside the household is alive without being loud. Kallias's wife, Erinia, the second wife, the first, having died in childbirth 17 years ago, an event that the household and Kallias do not discuss, is in the inner rooms with the two younger children, supervising the morning's tasks. Their oldest son, a young man of 21 named Hipponikos after his grandfather, has been gone since before dawn, riding out to inspect the boundary of the family's vineyard up the valley. 3 household slaves are at work in the atrium and the kitchen. Another 4 are out on the estate. The whole arrangement runs, most days, on a small number of well-understood routines, the way a small ship runs on rope tension and habit. There is, in a small side room off the atrium, the thing about Kallias's house that distinguishes it from almost every other house in Attica, including Diocles' workshop with its single wax tablet. Kallias owns books. Not many. A dozen rolled scrolls, kept in a low cedarwood chest, all of them copies of texts he has either bought from booksellers in the Agora. There are perhaps 4 such sellers in Athens at this moment, all of them clustered near the colonnade by the Tholos, or had copied at his own expense by a literate household slave from the library of a friend. The titles, were you to ask him to list them, would surprise you. There is a complete Homer, both the Iliad and the Odyssey, on 6 tightly rolled scrolls. There is a partial Hesiod. There is a copy of the laws of Solon, which every educated Athenian gentleman is expected to be able to quote. There is a treatise on geography by a man named Hecataeus of Miletus, written about 60 years ago, which Kallias considers brilliant in parts and wrong in others. There is a small unfinished history of the recent Persian wars in 3 short scrolls by a man named Herodotus of Halicarnassus, who Kallias met twice last year and found, in person, both irritating and unforgettable. The Herodotus is the scroll Kallias has been thinking about most this season. The man himself, and we will get to him at some length before the night is done, has been traveling the Greek world for years now, asking everyone he meets to tell him what they remember about the great war their grandfathers fought against the Persians 50 years ago. He has been to Sparta. He has been to Egypt. He has been, apparently, as far east as Babylon, though Kallias is not entirely sure he believes that part, and he has been writing it all down, in long flowing prose, in a way that no Greek has ever quite done before. It is not poetry. It is not a list. It is not a temple inscription. It is, for lack of a better word, history. And the word will, in fact, end up taking that meaning for 2,500 years afterward, largely because of this one man writing on this one set of scrolls in this one decade. We will come back to him. The remarkable thing is that, in this generation, in this city, that level of inventiveness was so common that Kallias keeps Herodotus on a low shelf along with Hesiod and Solon, and considers him only one of several writers he is currently interested in. It is, Kallias judges, time. He folds the Syracusan letter carefully and sets it on the small table. He calls for his slave Pylades, who appears within 10 seconds. Pylades is always within 10 seconds of Kallias when his master is at home, and asks him to have the cart prepared and to send word ahead to the townhouse that he will be there by mid-afternoon. He will ride into the city. He will go to the assembly. He will, after the assembly, look in at the townhouse and see whether his older son has come in, and whether his younger son's tutor has any news of the boy's progress with arithmetic, which has been disappointing. He will not, this trip, walk through the Kerameikos. He has no business there. He does not yet know that the cup with the hunter and the stag, which he bought on impulse 3 days ago because the painted scene reminded him of an afternoon hunt he had taken with his own father at the age of 14, was painted by a potter named Diocles, whose workshop he could, if he wanted, walk to in 20 minutes. Diocles, similarly, does not yet know who has bought the cup. They will not meet today. They may, very plausibly, never meet at all. The city is small enough that they could. The city is large enough that they probably will not. That, too, is part of the answer to the question I asked at the beginning. The cart goes out through the gate of the estate, turns onto the road, and begins the slow, steady journey toward Athens. The road is dusty. It is not yet the great network of paved Roman roads that will, in another 4 centuries, lace the whole of the Mediterranean together. That story belongs to a different city, and we will not tell it tonight. This is a Greek road. It is packed dirt, edged with dry stone walls, and it has been used by enough cartwheels and donkey hooves over enough centuries that the wheel ruts are 6 inches deep in places. Kallias rides without speaking. The driver does not speak unless spoken to. The mule's harness creaks. The wheels grind. Off to the right, beyond a low rise, the white of the Acropolis catches the sun and stays in the corner of his eye for the entire journey, the way a particular star stays in the corner of a sailor's eye across a calm sea. At a particular point along the road, about halfway between the estate and the city, there is a small roadside herm, a stone pillar with a carved, bearded face that has been there longer than anyone can remember. It is dedicated to Hermes, the god of travelers, who is also the god of merchants and thieves and messengers, and, in a way the Greeks consider perfectly natural, the god of any kind of crossing a boundary between fields, a road between towns, a door between rooms, the threshold between waking and sleep. As the cart passes the herm, Kallias makes a small gesture with his fingers toward the carved face. The driver does the same. They do not stop. The gesture is not a prayer in any sense Kallias would describe. It is a habit, the way you might touch the brim of a hat. The gods, in 5th century Athens, are present in this way, woven into the gestures, the timing, the casual reflexes of the day. They are not a separate department of life. They are the weather of life. We will come back, much later tonight, to the question of what the Athenians actually believed about their gods. The answer is more interesting and considerably stranger than most modern accounts make it sound. For now, the cart rolls past the herm and continues toward the city. Chapter 8. The Gate, the Hill, and the Hour of Decision. The cart enters Athens through the Dipylon Gate. The Dipylon is the largest gate in the city walls, a double portal structure of fitted limestone with twin towers, named simply for its 2 openings, and it is, in a way Kallias has thought about more than once, the threshold between 2 different kinds of life. On the road, a man with a cart is a man with a cart. Once he has passed the gate, he is a citizen of a city, with a name in the registers and a place in the assembly, and 100 small obligations that begin to make themselves felt the moment the cartwheels strike the paved street inside. The cemetery is the first thing inside the gate. The Athenians, like most ancient peoples, buried their dead outside the city walls. But they buried them along the road that the living used most, so that you could not enter or leave Athens without passing the names of those who had gone ahead. Kallias does not look at the markers as the cart goes by. He does not need to. He knows which row holds his own father's stele and which holds his first wife's, and he visits both twice a year on the appointed festival days. He looks instead at the road ahead, at the slope rising toward the Acropolis, and off to the right at the gentler slope of the Pnyx, where, in perhaps half an hour, 6,000 of his fellow citizens will gather to settle the question of Samos. The cart cannot go to the Pnyx itself. The slope is too rough for wheels. Kallias has the driver stop at a small stable yard belonging to a man who, for a small monthly fee, keeps his cart and mule available whenever Kallias needs them, and from there he proceeds on foot. He has done this walk perhaps 200 times. He could do it in his sleep. He passes the same fountain at the corner, the same shoemaker's doorway, the same old man who sits at the same step every weekday selling small clay figurines of the goddess Athena. The shoemaker looks up. The old man looks up. Kallias nods to both. Neither expects a coin. He gives the old man one anyway, because he has done so for 30 years, and the day he stops will be a day that has gone somehow wrong. By the time Kallias reaches the lower slope of the Panics, several thousand citizens are already there, and several thousand more are coming up the various paths from the city. The slope itself is roughly trapezoidal, a great open bowl carved into the side of the hill, with the speaker's platform the bema, a low rectangular block of cut limestone at the front, and the bare hillside rising behind it, where the citizens stand or sit on the ground. There are no seats, there are no railings, there is no shade. The whole arrangement is, by design, profoundly simple. You walk up, you find a place to stand, you listen, you raise your hand, you go home. This is the thing that 2,500 years after the fact is still the hardest for anyone reading about it to picture properly. 6,000 men on a hillside, without amplification, without scripted talking points, without television cameras, without anything, in fact, that a modern political event has, except a low stone platform and a man on it speaking loudly enough for the front rows to hear clearly, and the back rows to catch perhaps 2/3 of the words. The Athenian assembly was not a metaphor for direct democracy. It was direct democracy. The men present were, between them, the government of the state. The decisions they made, by show of hand, were the law. There was no court of appeal above them. There was no executive who could veto them. There was no Senate that had to ratify them. They were the Senate. They were the legislature. They were, on the days they sat as a court, the judiciary too. Diocles, by the time the herald rises to open the proceedings, has found his place on the slope about 1/3 of the way up. He is standing among 3 other men he knows, a sandal maker, a flute player, and a stone cutter, none of whom he sees regularly outside of assemblies and festivals, all of whom he nods to as he arrives. 40 yards above him, on the slope that rises toward the back, Kallias has found his own place among 5 or 6 men he knows from political dinners and from the country gentry of Attica. The 2 men do not see each other. They have no reason to. The slope is full of small clusters like this, men who know each other gathered loosely together, the way men in any large crowd will do. The herald in a moment will rise. He will say the customary words. He will purify the platform with a small libation of poured wine onto the stone, the way every assembly is opened. He will read out the agenda. He will invite the first speaker forward. The first speaker will be a man known to almost everyone here, a general of the city, a friend of the man who has, more than anyone, shaped Athenian policy for the last 15 years. We will get to him by name in a moment. For now, it is enough to say that the great political figure of this generation, the man whose strategic decisions are determining the shape of the whole Eastern Mediterranean, is presently standing in a small wooden enclosure to one side of the bema, in a hymation no finer than Diocles, waiting for his turn to speak. He will not, in any modern sense, be introduced. He will simply step up onto the stone, and the crowd will fall quiet, and he will begin. The man with the broad forehead is named Pericles. He is, in this year, in his early 50s, in the prime of his political career, and he has been elected one of the 10 generals of Athens for 15 consecutive years. The Athenians do not have a president or a prime minister or a king. They have 10 generals, strategoi, elected annually by the assembly, and the generals collectively, in close consultation with the council and the assembly itself, run the city. Pericles has been one of them, year after year for so long that the institution is, in practice, partly the institution of Pericles. He is not technically the head of state. Athens has no head of state. But for the citizens standing on this slope at this moment, Pericles is, by accumulated habit and undisputed competence, the closest thing the city has to a single political mind. We will, before the night is done, come back to Pericles in more detail, to his strange family circumstances, to his unconventional partner, Aspasia, who has, in her own way, become one of the most discussed women in Athens, despite not being legally Athenian at all, and to the speech he will give the year after this one over the bodies of the first Athenian war dead in the great conflict that is already beginning to gather like a thunderhead on the horizon. The speech, when it comes, will be one of the most quoted documents in the history of political thought. But that is next year's speech. Today's speech is about whether the fleet should sail against Samos, and it is going to be, by Pericles' standards, a relatively brief one. He has, by the time he steps to the stone, decided what he wants to say, and he says it without flourish. He speaks plainly. Samos, an allied city, has revolted against Athenian authority. The revolt cannot be allowed to stand, because if it is allowed to stand, every other allied city will draw the obvious conclusion: the fleet must sail. The cost will be considerable. The duration may be longer than the assembly expects. He himself will sail with it, as one of the commanding generals. He recommends that the assembly authorize the expedition with the full strength required to settle the matter quickly and to demonstrate to any city contemplating a similar revolt next year that the Athenian fleet has both the capacity and the resolve to enforce its alliances. He sits down. Diocles, in his place a third of the way up the slope, listens. He has heard Pericles speak 20 or 30 times. He has voted with him often. He has twice voted against him. He does not particularly like Pericles, who is a remote sort of man, but he respects him, which is, in Diocles' private accounting, a more reliable basis for civic life than liking. The speech is, on its face, exactly what one would expect. The question is not really whether the fleet will go. The question is the size of it, and the length of the campaign authorization, and what funds will be released from the treasury to pay for it. Two more speakers rise after Pericles. One argues for a smaller expedition. One argues that an extra squadron of triremes should be added in case Persian ships intervene. Diocles listens to both. He weighs them, in the small private courtroom of his head, against what he knows of the geography of the Eastern Aegean, which is more than most of the men around him because he has been there in his 20s as a hoplite. Kallias, further up, is doing his own private calculation. He owns shares in 3 merchant ships that trade through the very waters the fleet will be operating in. A long campaign will be bad for trade in the short term and good for it in the long term, because a Samos brought back into the alliance is a Samos whose harbors are open and whose merchants pay their dues. He weighs this against the cost of the contribution his own household will be assessed. Wealthy citizens are expected to fund the outfitting of warships out of their own purses, in a system the Athenians call the triarchy, and Kallias has done this twice already in his life and considers it both an honor and an irritant. He decides, by the time the third speaker sits down, that he will vote in favor of the expedition at the larger size. The herald calls for the vote. Hands rise. The slope, for a long moment, is a rippling field of raised arms. The presiding officers walk down the front of the crowd, eyeing the count from different angles. The vote is not, today, close. The expedition will sail. The size will be the larger one. The campaign is authorized. The herald announces the result. The men begin to lower their hands. Some are already turning to leave, talking among themselves. Others remain to hear the next item of business, which concerns a proposed festival appropriation and will be of less interest. Diocles lowers his hand. 40 yards above him, Kallias lowers his. Neither of them is aware in this moment that they have, both of them, voted the same way. Chapter 9. Why them? Why there? Why then? The answer in the open hand. Remember, at the very beginning of tonight, the question we asked, why these people? Why this place? Why this time? Why did a small dusty city of perhaps 250,000 souls, perched on stony soil that did not particularly want anything planted in it, produce, in the span of 200 years, more of what we now think of as Western civilization than entire centuries of much larger and richer empires before and after? Here is the answer, and it is sitting in Diocles' hand right now as the hand lowers from the open vote. The answer was never the marble. The answer was never the philosophy in the abstract. The answer was this hand raised in the same air as Kallias's hand 40 yards above it. It is the open hand, the fact of it. The fact that a potter from the Kerameikos and a great landowner from Alopeke, neither of whom would have recognized the other in a crowd, can stand on the same dusty slope, with the same dust on their sandals, and cast votes of the same weight on the same question, and walk home afterward to the same dinner of barley bread and olive oil and watered wine. It is not that the city was free of cruelty. Lysandra is at her loom right now without the right to be on this slope at all. Doris is at the fountain with no rights of any kind. The slaves at Lorient are dying, even as we speak, in tunnels under the southern hills, mining the silver that pays for the very fleet the assembly has just voted to send to Samos. The city is shot through with brutalities that no honest account of it can soften. And yet, the strange and stubborn thing about Athens, the thing that the centuries since have not quite stopped marveling at, is that within the circle of men who counted as citizens, there was a kind of practical equality that no other ancient society had built, and that very few societies since have built without losing something else. Diocles' hand, when it went up, was Kallias's equal. The fishmonger's hand was Pericles' equal. A man who could not read fluently could outvote a man who could read 3 languages, if there were more hands on his side. The city ran on this principle. The city, in some ways, was nothing but this principle. That equality, narrow as it was, produced the rest. It produced the philosophy, because a society in which any citizen can be questioned by any other citizen on the meaning of his words is a society in which philosophy is, in effect, a public hobby. It produced the drama, because a city that has trained itself to listen on a hillside to extended speeches that try to persuade by argument is a city ready to sit through the long speeches of Aeschylus and Sophocles on a different hillside on the other side of the Acropolis. It produced the history writing because a culture that holds collective debate about collective decisions naturally produces men like Herodotus and Thucydides, who think it worth writing down how the debates went and what the decisions cost. It produced the architecture, because a city that funds its public buildings by collective vote builds public buildings the citizens are proud to have voted for. The Parthenon, in this sense, is the assembly's signature. The marble is just the medium. There are other answers, of course. Geographers will tell you the answer is the soil, that the thinness of Greek farmland forced Greeks into trade and seafaring, and into the constant traffic of ideas that comes with traffic in goods. Climatologists will tell you the answer is the climate, the long, mild Mediterranean year that lets a man stand in a colonnade in the afternoon and not freeze and not boil. Linguists will tell you the answer is the language Greek's flexibility, its richness in particles, its strange ability to nest abstract ideas inside concrete words. Economists will tell you the answer is silver. The mines at Lorient, struck rich at exactly the right moment, paying for exactly the right fleet, at exactly the right time. All of these are pieces of the answer. None of them by themselves is the answer. The answer is the assembled men on the slope and the hands going up. The rest of it grew from there. And tomorrow, Diocles and Kallias will get up and do it again, because tomorrow there will be another decision to make. And the alternative, not voting, not gathering, not arguing, is not, in their world, an alternative at all. 2 miles away, in the courtyard of her small house, Lysandra is sitting on a stool with the youngest child asleep on her shoulder and the older two playing quietly at her feet. She does not know how the vote on Samos has gone. She will know by evening when Cleon comes home and tells her, and she will absorb the information the way she absorbs the weather as a fact of her world, neither welcomed nor refused. She does not know that her husband, Cleon, who closed the leather workshop early to walk up to the Phoenix, raised his hand the same way Diocles raised his, the same way Kallias raised his. She does not know that her son Philon, in 9 years, will be doing the same thing. She will know about the vote by evening. She will not know, the way you know things tonight, that the expedition to Samos will be longer and harder than Pericles predicts, that it will keep many of the men of this city away for months, that some will not come home, that the war that will eventually unmake the Athenian Empire is already, in this very vote, beginning quietly to shape itself. She will not know any of that. But she will know when Cleon walks in through the door at sunset with the day's news that something has been decided, and that the household, like every household in Athens, will adjust around the decision. That too is part of how the city works. The men vote. The women run the households that absorb the consequences. We will come back to the women of Athens before the night is through, to Aspasia in particular, to the curious legal position of citizen wives, to the lives of the women who, like Lysandra, were never on the slope, but whose lives were shaped by every hand raised on it. For those of you watching tonight who served in any capacity, in any era, who voted in your first election a long time ago and have voted faithfully in every one since, who served on juries, who paid your taxes without making a great noise about it because that was simply what a citizen did. You understand, I think, the shape of what Athens was, in a way that abstract descriptions cannot quite reach. If you have memories of voting in the 40s or 50s, of standing in line at a town hall or a school gymnasium, of casting a ballot on a measure that mattered to your neighborhood, I would be glad to hear those stories down in the comments below. Athens did not invent any of that. Athens invented the idea that ordinary men, gathered together, could carry the weight of it. The rest of human history has been arguing with that idea ever since. Diocles returns to his workshop in the mid-afternoon. He hangs the himation on its peg. He nods to his apprentices, who have, in his absence, prepared a fresh ball of clay and dampened the cloths over yesterday's work. He sits down at the wheel. The new commission, the set of 4 cups for Kallias, whose name he now knows but whose face he has never seen, is the work he means to begin this afternoon. He spins the wheel with the inside of his foot. The clay rises between his hands. The city, on its slope, and in its streets, and in its small smoky workshops, settles back into the quiet, steady rhythm that is the truer texture of Athenian life than any speech from the bema will ever quite capture. The assembly is the spectacle. The afternoon at the wheel is the substance. Kallias does not, in fact, stop at the townhouse that afternoon. The vote went the way he wanted. The day is fine, and he decides instead to ride straight back to Alopeke and read the Syracusan letter again in the cool of the late afternoon. On the portico, with the long shadow of the great old olive tree slowly extending across the courtyard floor. The cart rolls out through the Dipylon gate. The cemetery passes on the right. The herm passes. The road opens. Off to one side, in the middle distance, a single farmer is bent over a row of beans in a small kitchen garden, and Kallias watches him for as long as the cart's pace allows, with the small, attentive pleasure of a man who has spent his life in the company of the land. The farmer does not look up. The farmer has, this afternoon, his own quieter business with the soil. Chapter 10. The Snub-Nosed Man in the Colonnade. While Diocles is at his wheel, and Kallias is on the road home, and Lysandra is putting the youngest child down for an afternoon nap on a wool pad in the courtyard, in the shade of the painted stoa, a particular conversation is taking place that, in 2,500 years, will turn out to have mattered considerably more than any of the participants would have guessed. The man at the center of the small, loose circle is the snub-nosed one. He is, by Athenian standards, not handsome. He is short, broad, balding at the front, with eyes that protrude slightly and a flat, upturned nose that, even in this generation accustomed to seeing him on every street corner, occasionally draws comment. He is 40-something years old. His name is Socrates. He is, at this moment, the son of a stonecutter, a man of no particular wealth, no political office, no formal training in anything except the trade of his father and a brief military stint in the army. He has not yet become the figure that, in 2 centuries, the philosopher Plato will turn him into. He has, in this year, not written a single book, and will not write one until the day he dies. He talks. That is, in a literal sense, what he does for a living, except that he does not, technically, earn one. What he is doing in the Colonnade this afternoon is what he does most afternoons. He has fallen into conversation with a younger man, the 25-year-old, a wealthy citizen's son who fancies himself well-spoken, and he is, with the deceptive gentleness that the next 2,000 years will not quite manage to capture in writing, taking the young man's confident statements apart, one by one. The conversation began 20 minutes ago, with the young man saying, in passing, that of course he knew what justice was, the way any honest citizen of Athens knew. Socrates had said, "Well then, explain it to me. I am a slow man. I have never been able to grasp it. Help me," the young man had explained. Justice, he had said, is giving each person what is owed to them. Socrates had nodded slowly, as if considering this with great gravity. Then he had asked, even if what is owed is a sword, and the person owed is now drunk and threatening murder. The young man had paused. He had revised. Justice is giving each person what is good for them. Socrates had nodded again. Then he had asked, and who decides what is good for them? The giver, the receiver, the city, the gods, or some combination? The young man, by now, had begun to suspect that he was in trouble. He had revised again. He was still revising, and Socrates was still nodding, and the small circle of listeners had grown, in the last 20 minutes, from 3 men to 7. This is what Socrates does. He has done it. Every afternoon he is not on military campaign for about 15 years. He has, in that time, irritated approximately every other man in Athens at least once. He has been called, variously, a corrupter of youth, a sophist, a fool, a busybody, and in the comic plays of a writer named Aristophanes, who is at this moment a teenager and not yet writing a stargazer who claims the gods do not exist. None of these descriptions is quite right. What Socrates actually does is force men in public to discover that they do not know what they thought they knew. He calls this aporia, perplexity. He considers it the beginning of all useful thought. The men subjected to it do not, generally, agree. The remarkable thing about this afternoon, and about 1,000 afternoons like it in this same colonnade, is that it costs nothing and is open to everyone. Socrates does not charge. He has, in fact, mocked teachers who do charge the famous sophists, men like Protagoras and Gorgias, who travel between cities and lecture for a fee, calling them, with the deadpan irony that is his trademark, the wisest of men, since they know how to make money from teaching what no one can actually teach. The young wealthy citizen at the center of the present conversation could, if he wanted, go pay Protagoras 500 drachmas, about 2 years' wages, for a Diocles, for a course of formal instruction in rhetoric. Or he can, free of charge, get torn to pieces in the Stoa by Socrates and possibly learn something more durable in the process. He has, this afternoon, chosen the latter. He is not, by the end of it, sure it was the better deal. I am telling you all of this now, in this part of the night, because there is something about Socrates that any honest account of Athens has to face. And that is that he is, in his own city, in his own century, not yet famous. He is known. He is conspicuous. He is, in certain circles, beloved and infuriating in roughly equal measure. But he is not, in this year, the world historical figure he will be made into. There is no Socratic school. There is no chair of philosophy. There is no library of his books, because, as I said, there are no books of his. The conversations are what he is. When he dies, and he will die, 22 years from this afternoon, by being made to drink hemlock at the order of the Athenian assembly, on charges that the assembly itself, 10 years later, will quietly come to regret what survives him, will be other men's memories of what he said. Plato will write some of those down. Xenophon will write some down. The two accounts will not entirely agree. We will, before the night is done, come back to the day he drinks the hemlock, and to what it tells us about the city that put him on trial. But that is a story for a later hour. For now, he is alive, in a worn hymation in a colonnade, asking a young man what he means by the word justice, and the answer is not coming. The young man eventually finds a way to extract himself with dignity. He says something about needing to be home before sundown, which is true. He inclines his head to Socrates, which is also a small public concession. He walks off into the Agora, and as he walks, he is thinking already, before he has reached the end of the colonnade, about what he might have said differently, and that thinking will not stop for several days. And the next time he sees Socrates, he will try again, and the time after that, and the time after that. In this way, Athens makes philosophers, not by enrollment, not by tuition, by being a city in which a young man, walking home with a sore head, decides that the embarrassment was worth more than the lecture would have been. The gray-bearded man who has been listening turns now to Socrates, and the two of them begin a quieter conversation about, of all things, the nature of friendship. The late sun catches the edge of the column. The Agora behind them is folding up its stalls. At about the same hour, Socrates is settling into the friendship conversation with the gray-bearded man. 2 miles west and a few streets back from the Agora, Lysandra is standing at her doorway, with the youngest child on her hip, watching the street for her husband. Cleon usually comes home at this hour. Today he is late, because of the assembly, and she is not anxious. She knows where he is, and she knows it ended at midday. But the small habitual watching is built into the late afternoon, the way the wool combing is built into the early morning. The street is quiet. A neighbor's slave passes carrying a covered basket. A small dog she has known for years trots by on some purpose of its own. The light on the opposite wall is the particular late gold of an Athenian early evening, and it lays itself across the mud brick the way it has done every clear afternoon of her life. Cleon appears at the end of the street, walking with the easy, unhurried gait of a man on familiar ground. He sees Lysandra at the doorway, raises a hand. she raises hers in return. The 3-year-old, seeing her father, begins the small, twisting struggle that means "put me down," and Lysandra obliges. The child runs the dozen steps to Cleon and is caught and lifted. Lysandra steps back into the courtyard. There is bread to slice. There is the lamp to be lit again, against the coming evening. There is, on the small wooden table in the main room, the half-finished length of dyed-edge cloth, still waiting on the loom for tomorrow morning. There is, in some sense, a husband and a meal, and the slow folding of a household into a quiet evening. Athens, on this slope and in this small street, and in 1,000 other small rooms across the city, is settling. Chapter 11. Lamplight, Bread, and the Symposium across the wall. The evening meal in a working citizen household is not the elaborate banquet that, in 2,500 years, the word Greek dinner will conjure up. There are no couches, there is no reclining, there are no long dialogues about love or wine or the immortality of the soul. There is a small wooden table, a clay lamp, a round flat loaf of barley bread sliced into wedges, a shallow bowl of olives, a smaller dish of fresh white cheese made by Lysandra 2 days ago from milk she bought from a neighbor with a goat, a small whole fish, a mackerel from this morning's harbor catch, baked whole on a clay platter, and a pitcher of watered wine. The family sits. The household slave, Doris, stands. Cleon pours a small libation onto the floor for the household gods, a habit so old that no one in the house consciously notices when it happens. The meal begins. Cleon tells Lysandra about the assembly. He keeps it short. The fleet will sail. Pericles will go with it. The assessment on the wealthy citizens will be substantial, which is none of their household's concern. The campaign is expected to last through the summer and into the autumn. There may, depending on how the Samians hold out, be a winter on the islands. Lysandra absorbs this. She thinks very quickly and very privately about which of the men in her wider family will be eligible for call-up, a younger brother of Cleon's, a cousin on her mother's side, a neighbor 2 doors down, whose son turned 18 last spring. The thinking does not show on her face. She breaks another piece of bread and dips it into the oil dish, and says mildly that they had better get word to Cleon's brother before he hears the news from someone else. Cleon nods. He has thought of the same thing. The household, in this way, runs. 3 streets away, in a different kind of household, a different kind of evening is beginning. The covered dish the slave is carrying down the street toward a particular doorway is destined for a small symposium, a drinking party being hosted this evening by a moderately wealthy citizen named Kerameikos, who has invited 6 male friends and a flute girl for an evening of conversation, song, and the carefully watered wine that Greek hospitality considers a moral requirement. The dish under the cloth is a roast hare with herbs, which the host has commissioned from a particular cook in the Agora, because the hare is, in the ranking of Athenian banquet meats, considered considerably more sophisticated than the household's daily fish. We will not stay long at Kerameikos' house, because the symposium has its own rhythms, and they are not the rhythms of Lysandra's evening. But we will look in long enough to see what the men of this city do when the day's work is done. A symposium is, on its surface, a dinner party. Beneath the surface, it is one of the more peculiar institutions of Greek life and one of the most consequential. The men recline. They do not sit on couches arranged around a central table, each man on his left elbow, free hand for the cup. They eat first. They eat moderately, by the standards of Roman feasts that will come centuries later, because eating is the prelude rather than the main event. When the food is cleared, the real business of the evening begins. The host appoints a symposiarch. a master of ceremonies who will decide how strong to mix the wine in the crater, what topics will be discussed, and what songs will be sung. The wine is mixed with water in a ratio that the symposiarch announces. 1:3 is moderate, 1:2 is bold, 1:1 is the kind of evening that produces stories that everyone will deny later. The Greeks consider drinking unmixed wine the mark of a barbarian and drinking heavily mixed wine the mark of a coward. The middle is, as in most Greek things, the virtue. The symposium at Polemarchos' house tonight will discuss, by the host's choice, the question of what makes a good city. It is the kind of topic that Athenians of this class consider light dinner conversation. The metic from Syracuse will offer a few comparisons with his own city. The elderly man with the white beard will quote, with the casual ease of a man who learned it as a boy, several lines of an older poet who wrote on the subject 100 years ago. The host will offer his own opinion. The younger men will argue with each other more loudly than the topic requires. The flute girl, when she arrives, will play between the speeches and during the songs. Wine will be drunk. Riddles will be exchanged. Someone there is almost always someone will, at a particular point in the evening, propose a more elaborate question about love or courage that will keep the company up later than the host's wife would prefer. Wives, of course, are not present. Wives have their own quieter evening in another part of the house. The symposium is a men's room in the strictest sense. The wife's evening on the other side of the wall is quieter and not, in any honest accounting, less interesting. She sits with her sister's daughter, who is staying with the household for a few days, and the two of them work small pieces of embroidery, while a household slave brings in dried figs and a small jug of unwatered fruit juice. Wives, even at parties like this one, drink considerably less than husbands. The niece plays a few quiet phrases on a small lyre. The wife asks her, with the affectionate skepticism of an aunt, about the young man her family is currently considering for her marriage. The niece is non-committal. The wife smiles very slightly and says nothing more. The conversation drifts toward the embroidery, then toward a particular festival coming next month, then toward a remembered evening from 20 years ago when, as a young bride herself, she had spent her own first symposium night, just like this, in a different inner room of a different house. The men's voices through the wall rise and fall on the wine. The women's voices on this side do not particularly rise at all. This division, the men's evening on one side of the wall, the women's on the other, is one of the things that, in modern accounts of Athens, gets either overemphasized or undernoticed. It was real. It was strict. A citizen wife in 5th century Athens lived a more enclosed life than a wife in most of the other societies the Greeks knew. The wives of Sparta had considerably more public freedom. The wives of Egyptian merchants had considerably more legal autonomy. The wives of Persian noblemen had considerably more wealth at their personal disposal. Athens was, by these comparisons, unusually restrictive of its citizen women's public lives. And yet, and this is the part that simple summaries miss within the household, the citizen wife in Athens was, in practical terms, the chief executive. She ran the budget. She ran the slaves. She raised the children. She supervised the wool, the bread, the medicine, the linen, the storage of grain, the keeping of accounts when accounts needed keeping. The household was her domain, and she ran it without much supervision and with considerable practical authority. Husbands often returned home, as Cleon did this evening, to ask their wives what had happened during the day, and to receive in reply a competent briefing. There is, in this generation, a woman in Athens who does not fit the pattern. Her name is Aspasia. She is, in this year, somewhere in her late 20s or early 30s. The sources do not agree on her exact age, and she is not a citizen of Athens. She was born in Miletus, in Ionia, on the eastern coast of the Aegean, and she came to Athens some years ago for reasons that are not entirely clear and have been argued about for 2,000 years. She is, by the time of this evening, the partner of Pericles. They are not married because they cannot be married. A recent law that Pericles himself, with brutal irony, helped to pass restricts Athenian citizenship to those whose parents are both Athenian, which means his own union with a non-Athenian woman has been placed, by his own hand, outside the legal framework of the city. They live together anyway. They have, by this year, one son between them, also named Pericles. The boy cannot, by the law, his father wrote, inherit Athenian citizenship. What makes Aspasia unusual is not, by itself, that she lives with Pericles. There were always foreign women in Athens with arrangements of various kinds. What makes her remarkable is that her house, which is also Pericles' house, is the one home in Athens where the customary segregation of men's and women's evenings does not entirely hold. Aspasia receives. She receives in person the political and intellectual men of her partner's circle, and they treat her not as the silent hostess but as a participant. Socrates has, by this year, almost certainly met her. He will, in dialogues that Plato writes decades from now, speak of her as a teacher of rhetoric. He will say, and it is hard to know how much of this is Plato's irony, that she wrote some of Pericles' best speeches. The other generals' wives do not visit her house, because the other generals' wives are not permitted to. Their husbands, however, do visit. They argue with her, they lose arguments to her. They go home and do not tell their wives where they have been. This is the part of Athenian life that the marble columns are not equipped to advertise. The city was, on its surface, profoundly restrictive of women's public participation. Lysandra does not vote, and never will. Polemarchus' wife does not attend the Symposium, and never has. Doris has no legal personhood whatsoever. And yet, in the same city, in the same year, a foreign woman with no civic standing at all is shaping the political language of the man who is, in practical terms, running the state. And the most influential philosopher of the century is going to her house to argue with her. Athens contained, simultaneously, both of these realities. Any honest account has to hold them together. The same culture that wrote Lysandra out of the assembly wrote Aspasia into the council of friends that gathered around Pericles, and it did not perceive the contradiction because, in the categories of 5th century Athens, it was not properly a contradiction at all. We will come back, before the night is done, to several other Athenian women whose lives complicate the simple story, to the priestesses who held some of the most powerful religious offices in the city, to the wealthy widows who managed estates, to the courtesans who were among the best educated women in the Mediterranean. The picture is not as flat as the textbook makes it. While Aspasia and Pericles are in mid-conversation about a matter of state that Aspasia will, by tomorrow morning, have helped to clarify into a particular phrase that Pericles will use the next time he speaks on the bema. And while the Symposium at Polemarchos' house is moving from the food into the wine and from the wine into the songs, and while Socrates is walking home from the Colonnade with the gray-bearded man still beside him, deep in a different conversation that has now begun to address whether friendship can survive disagreement on fundamental matters all over the city. Lamps are being lit in courtyards and shutters drawn against the cool of the evening. Athens, like every city of the ancient world in the absence of street lighting, becomes at full dark a quieter and more enclosed place than the city of midday. Men do not generally walk alone after dark unless they must. There are footpads, there are drunks, there are, in some neighborhoods, gangs of young men of the wealthier families who consider the night their playground and who occasionally beat up someone who happens to be in their way. The city has a small night watch, the Scythian archers, slaves bought collectively by the state. and used for policing, but their primary job is keeping order in the Agora during the day, and at night they are stretched thin. Chapter 12. Silver, Olives, and the Engine Beneath the City. There is, this evening, one thing more to say about Athens before the lamps in our story begin, one by one, to be extinguished. It is a thing that we have touched on lightly several times tonight, and that any honest account of the city has to face squarely before turning to sleep. The vote that the assembly took this afternoon, the fleet that will sail against Samos, the wages of the rowers, the upkeep of the triremes, the marble of the Parthenon being cut and dressed on the Acropolis at this very hour by skilled craftsmen who are paid for their labor, all of it, every drachma of it, is funded in part by silver. And the silver comes, almost all of it, from a single set of mines in the rocky hills of southern Attica, at a place called Lorion. There are at Lorion this evening somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 slaves working underground. Nobody in Athens knows the exact number, because nobody in Athens has bothered to count. The slaves are not, by and large, Athenian property. They are leased, in lots of 50 or 100 or 1,000, by the state to private contractors, wealthy citizens like Kallias' uncle, in fact, who is a major investor in two of the larger mining concerns. And the contractors put them to work. They work in galleries cut into the rock that are sometimes no more than 3 feet high. They work often lying down. They work by the light of small oil lamps that consume the breathable air faster than the lamps replace it. They die at rates that no Athenian citizen has ever calculated, and that historians, 2,000 years later, have only the roughest estimates for. Some of them are prisoners of war. Some are bought from slave traders working the Black Sea coast. Some were born into slavery in households that, for one reason or another, decided to sell them down to the mines as adolescents. The ore comes up. It is crushed. It is washed in a clever cascade of stone basins that the Greeks have engineered with the same patience they bring to everything they consider important. The lead is smelted out of it. The silver, which is bound up in the lead in tiny amounts, is then extracted from the lead by a process called cupellation, heating the molten lead in a shallow bone ash hearth in the presence of bellows-driven air until the lead oxidizes and the silver remains pure on the surface. The yield is small. From a ton of raw ore, the mines of Lorion produce, on average, perhaps 1 or 2 kilograms of refined silver. But the mines produce a great deal of ore. In the best years of this generation, the silver coming out of Lorion is enough to mint 100 talents, annually millions of small silver coins. The 4 drachma piece, called the tetradrachm, stamped with the head of Athena on one side and her owl on the other, which travel through every market in the Mediterranean. The fleet that sails to Samos will be paid in these coins. The marble for the Parthenon will be paid in these coins. The colonnades, the philosophers, the playwrights, the festivals, the assembly itself, all of it floats on the same dark river of silver, which is itself paid for in another currency by the men who do not come back up out of the galleries. This is, in any honest accounting of Athens, the part that the marble columns are very good at hiding. The owl on the coin does not show the mine. The Parthenon does not advertise the bone ash hearths or the men lying on their sides in galleries lit by small smoking lamps. The democracy on the slope of the Pnyx does not, in its own debates, generally discuss what is happening 60 kilometers to the south. The assembly today voted on Samos. It did not vote, and will never vote, on whether to continue using slave labor at Lorion. There is no proposal. There is no opposition. The mines, like the women's quarters and the slave at the courtyard wall and the silent half of every household, are simply part of the city's furniture. To say that this does not detract from what Athens achieved is wrong. It does. To say that it cancels what Athens achieved is also wrong. It does not. Both things are true, and any nighttime account of Athens that does not hold both of them in the same hand has, in the end, not really looked at Athens at all. Kallias, on the portico of his country house, has finished the Syracusan letter for the second time. He has set it aside. He has, in the way of a man with a long evening ahead, walked down the slope of the grove to put his hand on the trunk of the great old olive tree, the way he sometimes does. The tree is in leaf. The leaves move very slightly in a breeze he can barely feel. The tree has been bearing fruit by family tradition since before the time of Solon. It will, by all reasonable expectation, be bearing fruit a century after Kallias's dust. It does not, in the way of olive trees, ask any questions about silver mines or distant fleets. It simply, year after year, does what it does. Kallias stands with his hand on the trunk for perhaps a minute. Then he walks back up the slope to the house. Diocles closes up the workshop. He banks the small fire he has used to warm a pot of glue. He covers the wheel with a damp cloth. He checks the shelves and confirms that the apprentices have, before going home to their own households, properly dampened the cloths over the leather-hard pots of yesterday. He sets the lamp on its low shelf by the door, gives it a fresh wick from a small bundle on the shelf above, and steps out into the courtyard behind the workshop, where his own small house sits. His wife, a quiet woman a few years younger than himself, named Theodora, who I have not introduced because Diocles' household is calmer and more private than Lysandra's, and because, in any case, this tour of Athens is too long, is already at the loom in her own front room. The two children, both younger than Lysandra's, are asleep. The household is quiet. He sits down on a low stool beside her loom. Neither of them speaks for some time. The loom taps softly. The lamp burns. The night settles. Lysandra, in the courtyard of her own house, has put the children to bed and has come out for a moment alone before joining Cleon for the last cup of watered wine of the evening. The lamp burns at her feet. She looks up. The sky above Athens, on this particular evening at this particular hour, is the deep dusky blue of an early summer night, with the stars beginning to come through in their old familiar patterns. She knows them, by name and by season, in the way her mother taught her 30 years ago. The Pleiades, low on the horizon. The bright star the Greeks call the dog, riding higher. The great hunter Orion, with his belt of 3 stars, sliding toward the western horizon. The same stars her grandmother saw, and her grandmother's grandmother. They are, in their slow, patient turning above the rooftops, the one thing in her world that has not changed. The Parthenon is, in this year, only about half built. Construction began 6 years ago, in 447 BCE, and will continue, with various pauses, until 432, the year before the Great War begins that will, in another generation, undo most of what this generation built. The temple is being raised, by the deliberate decision of the assembly that voted to fund it, out of marble brought from a quarry on Mount Pentelicus, a hard day's ox cart journey to the northeast. The marble is dressed by craftsmen at the quarry, hauled down to the city on great rollers and ox teams, hauled up the slope of the Acropolis by a system of cranes powered by capstans and human bodies, and fitted by master masons with a precision that has, 2,500 years later, not entirely been understood. Every column tapers slightly. Every horizontal line curves very gently upward at the center to compensate for the optical illusion that would otherwise make it look as if it sagged. Nothing in the Parthenon is straight in the simple sense, because the Greek architects who designed it understood, with terrible patience, that human eyes do not see straight lines as straight unless the lines themselves are subtly bent. The men carving the columns work, by day, under contracts paid by the city by the silver of Lorion, which is also the wages of the rowers who will sail to Samos, and the stipends of the citizens who serve on juries, and the festival prizes for the choruses that sing in the great drama festivals. The whole machinery of Athenian public life turns on the same coin. The same coin pays on this evening for the meal in Polemarchus' house, and for the lamp oil in Lysandra's, and for the small olive that Diocles ate this morning at his brother's stall. The economy is, in its way, beautifully integrated, and the place at the center of the integration is the assembly, which decides each year what the city will spend its money on. And the place underneath the integration is the mines, which have no voice in any decision at all. Athens, like every great civilization before and since, runs on something it does not entirely look at. That, too, is part of the answer to the question we asked at the beginning of tonight. Inside, Cleon has poured the last cup of watered wine for the two of them to share. They sit at the small table. They do not say much. He tells her about Pericles' speech in 3 sentences, which is the way he tells her about almost everything from the assembly. Lysandra prefers it that way, because she has learned, over 14 years of marriage, that her husband is a competent reporter when given the room to be concise, and a terrible one when invited to embroider. She tells him, in the same compressed style, about the bread and the dye-edged cloth, and the small accident the 3-year-old had at midday with a spilled jar of olive oil. They agree, without needing to say so, that the household is in good order. They drink the wine. The lamp burns down. Eventually, Lysandra rises, checks once on the sleeping children, and goes to bank the small fire on the hearth for the night. Chapter 13. The Last Lamp. A Final Hour in Athens. There is a particular hour of the night in Athens, somewhere between full dark and the first hint of dawn, when the city is as quiet as it ever gets. The symposia have wound down. The conversations in the colonnades have ended hours ago. The lamps in most houses have been extinguished. The night watch is dozing at its post by the Agora. The dogs have given up barking at small noises. Even the donkeys are still. The only sounds, if you walked very quietly through the streets, would be the small night breathing of mud brick walls cooling, the soft creak of a beam settling, the distant murmur of a baby crying somewhere across the city and being soothed by a tired mother in a dark room. It is the hour, 2,500 years later, that no marble column has ever been built to commemorate, and that is perhaps the truest hour of the city of all. Lysandra sleeps. Cleon sleeps. The children sleep, all 3 of them, in the small back room behind the heavy wool curtain. Doris sleeps on her thin mat against the courtyard wall, with a thicker blanket tonight because the air has cooled. 3 streets away, in his own small house behind the workshop, Diocles sleeps beside Theodora, with their 2 children breathing softly in the next room. In the country house at Alopeke, Kallias sleeps in a finer bed beneath a finer linen sheet, with the same kind of olive wood headrest that anyone in Athens, rich or poor, eventually sleeps on. Pericles sleeps. Aspasia sleeps. Socrates sleeps in a small house belonging to a wife the sources have called Xanthippe, in a bed not particularly different from Diocles. The slaves at Lorion do not sleep, because the night shift in the galleries does not stop, but that is a fact the city of Athens, in its sleep, does not consider. In 2,500 years, the city of Athens will still be here. It will not be, by then, the city of Lysandra and Diocles and Kallias. The mud brick walls will be gone. The wooden looms will be gone. The fountains will be gone mostly. The Agora will be a tourist site with low ruined walls. The Phoenix will be a quiet hill where school groups stand in the bare sun and try to imagine 6,000 men. The Parthenon will be by then both a ruin and a kind of secular shrine, half blown apart in a war between two empires that have not yet been imagined. In a century, the people of this evening cannot conceive of. The mines at Lorient will be silent. The slaves will be unnumbered names in no book. The owl of Athena will be on the back of a Greek euro coin. The currency of a nation-state called Greece that the people of this evening would not recognize as their own, though it will claim them as ancestors. And yet, in another sense, in the truest sense, an honest accounting of history can offer the city of this evening will not be gone. It will, in fact, be perhaps the most persistent city the human species has ever built. Not in its walls, in its habits of mind. Every time, 2,500 years from this night, anyone in any city anywhere stands up in a room and argues that a public decision should be made by reasoned debate among equals, rather than by the decree of a king that is Athens. Every time anyone insists that a confident statement be examined carefully to see whether the speaker actually knows what he is saying, that is Athens, and it is very specifically the Snub-Nosed Man in the Colonnade. Every time a playwright dares to put on a stage the suffering of an ordinary person and call it a tragedy of universal weight, that is Athens. And it is the dramatists whose plays will, in a year or two, premiere in the great theater on the southern slope of the Acropolis. Every time a citizen turns out to vote on a measure that will outlast him, knowing his single vote is one among millions and casting it anyway because the alternative is unthinkable. That is Athens, and it is Diocles and Kallias, raising their hands on the same dusty slope, neither one aware of the other, separated by all the differences of wealth and class that the city allowed and joined by the one equality it insisted on. The Athenian century I have shown you tonight will not last. Within 10 years, the great war between Athens and Sparta will begin. Pericles will be dead within 4 years of its beginning, carried off by a plague that, having ridden into the city from the harbor at Piraeus on a merchant ship, will kill perhaps a quarter of the population. Lysandra, if she is lucky, will survive it. Diocles, if he is lucky, will survive it too. Many of their neighbors will not. Aspasia will live longer than her partner. Socrates will live another 40 years and then be executed by the same assembly that voted today to send the fleet to Samos. The empire that produced the Parthenon will, within 60 years of this evening, be broken. The marble columns will, by then, be older than the city's confidence in itself. And Athens will spend the next 2,500 years living, in a sense, with the marble at its back, and a small, permanent ache in its civic memory. The greatest hour, when it comes, and it has been coming for tonight's entire telling, is also almost always the hour just before the long, slow afternoon. And so, we come back to where we began. Lysandra is awake again. She is, in this moment that closes our circle, kneeling by the same hearth, with the same bronze hook in her hand, laying the same kind of olive wood sliver on the same kind of banked ash. The new flame catches. The new lamp will be lit from it in a minute. The new day will begin. Doris will rise, the water will be fetched, the bread will be baked. Somewhere across the city, Diocles will sit at his wheel again, and 3 new cups for Kallias will begin to take shape between his hands. Kallias will read another letter from another friend in another corner of the Greek world. Socrates will go down to the Colonnade and find someone new to question. The assembly will meet or not meet, depending on the day. and small decisions will continue to be made by show of hand. The mines at Lorion will continue. The Parthenon will rise, course by course, on its hill. The world that this city is shaping into something unprecedented will continue, day by ordinary day, to be shaped. What Athens left behind in the end is not the marble. The marble is the souvenir. What Athens left behind is the habit. The habit of arguing carefully. The habit of standing up in a room of equals and saying what one thinks. The habit of refusing to be silenced because one is a craftsman and the other man is a landowner. The habit of asking in public what the words justice and good and city actually mean. The habit of putting on plays in which kings are humiliated and ordinary women speak their grief out loud. The habit of writing down, in clear prose, what happened and why, so that other people in other centuries can read it and disagree. These are habits, not buildings. They were built in the rooms and colonnades and dusty hillsides I have shown you tonight, by people whose names have mostly been lost. They have traveled since into almost every century and almost every country, and they are, on the day this is being heard, still being practiced, still being argued over, still being lost and found again, in legislatures and courtrooms and classrooms and small late-night conversations between friends all over the world. That is the inheritance. The marble is only the receipt. For those of you watching tonight who have lived through your own century of remarkable change, who voted in your first election in the 40s or 50s, who served in uniform when service was expected, who worked in factories or hospitals or farms or homes that made the second half of the 20th century possible, who saw your country and the world remake itself several times over and kept getting up in the morning and doing the work. You understand, I think, what Athens was in a way that no marble column can quite communicate. You understand that civilizations are not built by their famous men. They are built by the patient, repeated mornings of people whose names will not be remembered, who got up before dawn, who lit the lamp, who fed the children, who walked to the workshop or the assembly or the fountain or the factory floor, and who did, day after day, the small things that, accumulated, became the city. The marble columns stand on the shoulders of 10,000 Lysandras and Diocleses and Dorises, and 100 Kalliases and a Socrates here and there, and they would not stand at all without them. If tonight's journey stirred something, a memory of your own classroom Iliad, a story your father or your teacher told about the Greeks, a moment when democracy in your own century felt like something fragile and worth defending, or simply the small late-night sense that the past is closer than it looks, I would be genuinely honored if you shared it in the comments below. Those of you who served, who voted faithfully, who taught your children to read, who built and ran and worked the institutions of the second half of the 20th century. Your perspective on what Athens started, and what we have done with it since, is irreplaceable. The slope of the Phoenix is 2,500 years old. The questions asked on it are not, and in the quiet of history, their voices still echo. If we are willing to listen, the lamp is lit, the bread is rising, the wheel is turning, the hand is raised. The conversation in the colonnade is continuing, somewhere in the world at this very hour. Rest well tonight, and I will see you in the next one.